Father, thank you for you. We say good morning to you, Lord. The best we know how, we open up these hearts of ours. We all have different weeks we're coming out of. We all have different images in our head of you. But you are you, and you are good, and you are here. So come and find these hearts of ours this morning, Lord, and speak something good to us. Help us to see something about you and something about life that takes us somewhere better and that helps us become something better. I'm so grateful for this journey, Lord. This journey of life and this journey with you and this journey with brothers and sisters through all its ups and downs. I'm grateful for it because it is the process by which you are making all things new. So we give you this time and we come to sit at your feet in the good and strong and beautiful name of Jesus. Amen. Thanks, guys. So today we are wrapping up our series about joy, gazing on the starlit sky. 8 weeks. Quite a few of you have told me that this has been a really good series for you, and so I appreciate that. I'm glad for that. We've talked about dealing with our losses and our wounds, obstacles to our joy. We talked about recovering a vision for goodness. We've talked about the link, joy, the way God sees people, and with that, the desire of God, the desire that God has for the joy and blessing of all people, all human beings. And I will say again, as C.S. Lewis did, that joy is the serious business of heaven. It's not our mere trifling ideas of happiness. God made us, I really believe this, God made us so that He could watch us have joy. It's kind of a wild thought, because we look around and life's a mess and it's hard and all these things, but I think God's original idea, right? He creates a man and a woman, as the Genesis story tells us, and He puts them in a garden and He blesses them and He says, that's good. Made for joy. But in a world where things are skewed and where hearts have gotten off track, there's this sense of trying to find our way back, even fight our way back to joy. And the thing is that it can't be gotten hold of simply because you say, I want to be happy. Everybody wants to be happy. And the reason it can't be gotten hold of just because you think you want to be happy is because joy, this abiding sense of happiness and wonder dancing together, It has been, by the very nature of the way God has arranged our existence in the universe, specifically linked to the wholeness and the goodness of things. In other words, happiness, our shallower notions of happiness, I can have that even if your life sucks. But the idea of joy in God's economy, by His choice, by His design, has been linked to this larger understanding of sort of the wholeness and goodness of things. And that's different. And so in one sense, joy has a moral aspect. Joy will never come to those who are bent on selfishness or harm or dominating others. Joy will never come to people like that. In that sense, we could say that's the moral issue of joy. But I think the more profound aspect of joy is the way it is caught up in things becoming and being as they were meant to be. Things finding the form of their completeness. I want that to sink in. Things finding the form of their completeness. The New Testament writers, at this point in my sermon, because of course they would be listening to my sermon, I think they would, at this point, they would have pulled out a word that they used over and over again in their letters. They would interrupt me and they would say, Pastor Fran, you're talking about telos. That's the Greek word that has to do with completeness, the completeness of something, where something is ultimately going to become everything it was made to be. People in their hearts. There's a telos for our hearts, what we're made to be, how we're made to be. There's a telos for relationships, for justice in the world, for the experience of what life is. In Revelation 21:6, Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Omega is the last letter in the Greek alphabet, right? And then he spells out, he says, I am the beginning, right? I am the A and the Z. He says, I am the beginning and the end. That word end, guess what word that is? telos. Jesus is saying, I am where everything started, and I'm the wholeness of it. I'm the completion of it. I'm where it's going. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the one who is thirsty, I will give freely of the water of life. A couple weeks ago in my sermon, I poked a bit of fun at some of the things that defined the Christianity I embraced in my 20s. When I was a Christian in my 20s, and with the Christians I was around, and in the church that we were a part of, we thought we knew everything because we had a Bible in our hands that we could wave around. And we thought that we knew exactly which people were going to heaven and which people were going to hell. And we knew that Jesus was coming back tomorrow, or if not tomorrow, next week. We knew that we knew all these things. And then we knew that after that, he was going to torch the planet. And all the bad people were going to burn up. And the whole goal of our Christianity was to escape hell and make sure you got off the rock when Jesus beamed everybody up. There's still a lot of Christianity like that out there today. I just don't go to that church anymore. In contrast with that, Paul tells his young protege Timothy in 1 Timothy 1:5 that the goal of this whole thing is, listen to this, love from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. This is where it takes you. This is what Christ invites you to, is love from a pure heart, a good conscience, right? Where your heart's right, your motives are right, you're doing things for the right reasons, you're loving people in the right ways, and a sincere faith, which means not some kind of religion that plays angles on people and manipulates people and scares people and coerces people, but it's a faith rooted in who God really is and His goodness, and it changes who you are and what you live. Now, I share all this with you this morning to say that I believe that each of us needs to take a journey to become our authentic self, the person that we were made to be. I want to say that again because I want you to hear it, because it's not how everybody defines Christianity. I believe that we need to take a journey to become our authentic self, the person that we were made to be. So when the New Testament describes us as people who have bought into false ideas about life, who have come to believe lies about ourselves, and who have learned and embraced unhealthy strategies for getting what we think we want, I think this can very accurately be described as the development of our false self. All of those things contribute to the development of a false self, a false identity, a false sense of who I am as a person. And when Jesus calls us back to authenticity in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the pure in heart. Do not be like the Pharisees. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And when Paul speaks of the old man and the new man repeatedly in his letters, I hear in this an invitation to become my true self, not the self that was formed by the lies I believed about myself, by what everybody else thought life was about. And so I believe this language of kind of the false self and the true self, or the false self and the authentic self, can be helpful to us. That passage in Colossians, I've quoted it to you many times, but hear it again this morning. For you have taken off the old man with his ways, and you have put on the new man, who is being renewed in knowledge. It would sound odd if we translated it the way it really is. The Greek word is upnude. We could say like renewed upwardly. You're not just being renewed, you're being renewed in a specific direction. He says, you've put on the new man who's being renewed upwardly in his knowledge, his understanding, as he comes to understand the image of the one who is creating him. Authentic self, new self. This is why I love in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 when Jesus stands before a hillside of peasants and he says to them, quite shockingly, you are the light of the world. You know, I used to read that and go, I'm supposed to read my Bible. Yep, you are the light of the world. And then you really stop and you go, wait a minute, you picture all these people, right? Just regular people. Maybe even more regular than us. And Jesus says, you are the light of the world. And I always picture them going, who's he talking to? He's saying, you are the light of the world. It's as if he's trying to reawaken a population of amnesiacs to what they really are, which they have long ago forgotten. That's us. So, I was depressed this week. Can pastors make confessions in their sermons? I have before. How well do you handle that, okay? Do you ever have weeks like that? I was depressed this week. Nothing terrible. Just too many things that felt like they were hanging in the balance, you know? Ministry things I can't seem to find the time to get done. The struggles of friends and family members that I love, and how will these work out? I bear those burdens sometimes in my heart. I'm sure you do too, for the people that you love, you know. And how will people go on after things in their life maybe change so much, or they face such a struggle? I was wrestling this week with the question of our church's sustainability. LifeSpring has been, is, and is becoming the most amazing church community I've ever been a part of, but we're also in this little narrow window of like sort of financial sustainability. Are we going to be here next year and the year after that and the year after that? And I worry about that a little bit as your pastor. We have some big corners to turn, but we're going beautiful places. And then the other burden this week was, after trying to clear up a bunch of legalities around my mother's house for the last 8 months, because of the mistakes of the title company who handled the transaction, who handled the title insurance when my parents bought it 24 years ago, and the mistakes of the title company when it was sold previous to that, and the mistakes of the other title company before it was sold that, and how this was passed down. So after 8 months of trying to resolve these issues so that we can sell my mother's house and have the money to continue to pay for her care, I had to hire an expensive lawyer on Friday to sue the California Department of Housing for a clear title to our parents' home so we can sell it and get the money to care for my mom. And you never, with all due deference, Penny, you never want to hear the dollar amount the lawyer is about to tell you for what size retainer they need when it involves litigation. Let me just say that. So I was depressed and I was not feeling very joyful. And what it felt like was, with all these things hanging over my head, you know, what do I have? What am I grabbing onto? Maybe you felt that way in your life. And I realized again that what I have and will always have is the very real journey of becoming and more being my authentic self because of this journey with Christ. And there, in that piece of awareness in my life, I have a lot of joy. A simple way to say it would be, you know, whatever the, bombs and bullets are going off around you, the thing that can never be taken away is who God is and who you are becoming as an authentic human being as you journey in Him. So I wanted to talk this morning, and for me, when I remember that, the residual of joy appears again, and I go, oh yeah. So I wanted to talk this morning about this journey of becoming your authentic self as this last sermon on joy, and it's Father's Day, and now I know that not everybody has been blessed with great or even good parents, even some of you in this room, and believe me, I understand that, but my 3 brothers, my sister, and I were blessed with great parents, and my dad's story is remarkable, to me anyway, and it was a story of becoming his authentic self. And so today I want to tell a little of his story as an example and maybe an inspiration for us in thinking about this idea of the authentic self. And in so doing, I get to honor my dad, who's been gone for 20 years, on Father's Day. My parents both grew up in Milwaukee. They met in graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they fell in love and they got married. This next picture is my parents on their wedding day. And I know, doesn't it just take you back in time? No wedding day looks like that for some reason anymore. And you just look at it and you go, oh my gosh. And this is my father, Richard Kendall Lehman, who was known to his friends as Dick. with his family as a boy. That's my dad, second from the left, the shortest of the brothers. And my grandparents, Orville and Ella. And just to make it better, Ella was a twin and her sister's name was Della. Ella and Della. My dad, who I think when he was young was not really sure he wanted to go to college, ended up getting a PhD. He tried to get into all four branches of the military during World War II, like his older brothers, even the Merchant Marines. But he was I think he had flat feet and he was too small, I think. At least that's the story I remember. And so I wasn't sure, I don't know that he really wanted to go to college, but he ended up going to college. He ended up getting a PhD in English literature. And he became a Shakespeare scholar, if you will. And when I was growing up, he taught in various colleges and universities. And I love this next photo. Yeah, this photo, even though all you can see is the back of his head, because it's one of the few photos I've seen of my father as a young professor with these two students in his office. And if you look carefully, you can see the pipe hanging out of my father's mouth. How professorial is that? My dad was a pipe smoker when I was growing up. And now, my mom grew up Catholic with a sort of assumed faith, like, you know how it is, right? Grew up in church, yeah, I believe in God, I'm Catholic, whatever, you know. But my dad did not grow up in a family of faith, and there was a bit of sadness, I think, that hung over his mother, partially because of the loss of a young daughter. My dad would have had a little sister who died young, and I think that sadness in some ways hung over the family. I remember going to both my sets of grandparents lived in Milwaukee. My mom's folks on the south side of Milwaukee and my dad's folks on the north side of Milwaukee. And when we'd go to my mom's folks' house, my grandma and grandpa Rashi, there were big wet kisses and hugs and root beer floats. And when we went to my dad's parents' house, the front door would open after my dad knocked, and my grandmother with her arms crossed would say, "Hello, boys." And it was a very different experience that you sensed intuitively as a child, but you never really thought much about. So I think there was kind of this, I don't know, it was just different in my dad's family. And so when my dad went off to school in Madison, he was not a Christian. But he became friends with a guy who was a Jesus-loving Catholic. And my dad became intrigued with all these questions of faith. And he started to attend the Friday night talks at the Newman Center on the campus of the University of Wisconsin, which is kind of like a Catholic student union, which is where he met my mom. And just a couple of years ago, I asked my mom how that happened, and she told me that at those talks on those Friday nights at the Newman Center, the students mostly really went, all these Catholic kids, because it was a social thing. They went to hang out with their friends. And she said to me, "I noticed your dad because he was always sitting on the floor, down front, cross-legged, listening intently to every word that the speaker of the week, whoever the speaker of the week was, every word that person had to say." And my mom said, and I was kind of fascinated by that. Like, my mom was like, "Why is he so interested?" She said, "I was kind of fascinated by that, so I asked him if he would like to have a cup of coffee." And then because my dad was literally so poor, she bought every cup of coffee and paid for every date that they ever went out for in their lives. And so my dad, not having grown up with religion, at something like the age of 26, fell in love with Jesus Christ and entered the Catholic Church, even became an altar boy. And my parents got married, and my dad embarked on a teaching career, and they started to pop out us kids. And we moved from Milwaukee to the Twin Cities, where I was born, to California, to southeast Iowa, where I spent my grade school years, and then ultimately to Naperville, because my dad became the dean at Benedictine University here in Lisle, and then when I finished high school, they ultimately moved back to California. Now, this whole business of my dad's journey, this change that happened to him in graduate school, I knew none of this growing up. They weren't stories that were told, you know. I don't know how much your parents told stories about their lives, but I didn't know any of these things about my father's journey. Because, you know, you're a kid. He was a good dad. He earned a living, and he loved our family, and he took us camping, and most importantly, he taught us boys to fish. And I still cherish that, because I still love to fish. One of the things I actually appreciated about my dad in later years as I realized it is my dad was not a macho man. Well, first of all, it would have been hard for him to be a macho man because, he was a very, very slight person physically. But as I look back, he was a good balance. He was a scholar. He loved books, but when the washing machine broke, he had a toolbox, and he wasn't afraid to pull out the pliers and fix what needed to be fixed. And in that way, maybe I'm a little bit like him. I own a lot of books, and I own a lot of tools. I think I was in my 20s before I figured out my dad didn't even grow up with any of this Christian thing. We grew up Catholic. I'm like, I figured my dad was a cradle Catholic, right? And I had no idea. And then in my 20s, I started to realize, Dad's got a different history with all this stuff than Mom does. Now, I tussled with my dad, as most boys do during their growing up years. We had our battles. In fact, we had big battles. And it also took me a long time. I say this tongue in cheek, but there's a little truth to it. It took me a long time to forgive my parents for naming me Francis. My theme song growing up, some of you know this, was A Boy Named Sue by Johnny Cash. Because I felt my parents had done this terrible thing. I got teased about my name growing up, and I thought, so why couldn't I be Joe or Tom like my older brothers? Oh, no, I got to be Francis, So, we had our tussles, but what I want to tell you at this point is who I realized my dad was, and these things didn't really begin to dawn on me until I was in my 30s. My dad was a kind man. Yes, he was. My dad was compassionate. He was a person who had integrity. My dad was humble. This sort of shocked me when I realized it this week. I'm sure if I said to those of you who know me best at LifeSpring, have you ever, if you've known me for 20 or 30 years, have you ever heard me say anything arrogant? You'd be like, well, yeah, a couple times, Pastor Fran, we did. I never heard my father say an arrogant thing in his life, ever. He was a person who noticed and sought to help the struggling people. There was this woman in their Catholic parish in California. They went to this church called Star of the Sea. And she was, I think she was like maybe a leftover flower child. And the flower children all got older. She was older. She was like a leftover flower child who probably struggled maybe with some mental illness. And she always dressed in these kind of crazy, bright outfits. And, picture this in Catholic church. She would go dancing up and down the aisle, the center aisle in the church. And because of the way she dressed, her name was Ginger, and everybody knew her as Rainbow Ginger. Rainbow Ginger, lived on Social Security and had no money and had a lot of struggles. And my dad was always the one who helped her move when she had to move, who, fixed things at her house that needed to be fixed because, everybody in church was kind of looking and going, Rainbow Ginger, she's a little weird. And my dad was looking and saying, Rainbow Ginger's a human being. And it's my job to care for her. My dad was compassionate for struggling people. My dad was comfortable in his own skin. I don't know if you're comfortable in your skin. That's been a journey for me. But my dad was comfortable with who he was. My dad was always, always, always loving and respectful to our mother. I can never remember a time when my father snapped at our mom or anything like that. He was a reflective person, I don't know. If you're spiritual and you're into English literature, I suppose you have to be a reflective person. I don't know. But this will give you a picture. This is one of my favorite things ever with my father. So our family, Linda and I and the kids, were out visiting my parents in California. And the rest of us went out to do something. I don't remember what it is. You know the story I'm going to tell. And Linda stayed home with my dad, which was fine. They're hanging out, and I don't know what we were doing. And when we got home, and I walk in the living room, my father's laying on one sofa, Linda's laying on the other sofa, and they're listening to a long-playing 33 1/3 LP on the record player of Robert Frost reading his own poetry. That's my dad.
One of my best memories ever.
Yeah. And so he was this reflective person. He saw the good in people, and he hoped for people, and he hoped for what people could become. I know when I started to try to figure out my life in my 20s and 30s, and my Christianity became a bigger thing for me, I'm sure my dad thought a lot of the things I was chasing in the directions I was going were nutty, but my dad just kept encouraging me and knowing I was on a journey, and somehow it was going to go somewhere good. or at least he hoped it was. And the most uncanny characteristic of my father was that he had this ability to get beyond himself in conversation with other people and really be present and focused to other people. And here's the kicker, especially 5-year-olds. My dad, PhD in English literature. I have never seen anyone relate to a little child as well as my father. He would just come over and he would sit down next to them and he'd say, well, now tell me about this thing that, you were building over here. Or, tell me about when you went to the zoo recently and what kind of animals you saw. And he would actually, what was really weird about it, I've never been able to decode this because I like to be able to do this. He talked to little children like they were his equal. And they rose to it. And there was this unbelievable connection that would happen between them. And all the rest of us in the family would just sit back and go, what is that? My dad became this remarkable person. Now, my dad had 3 brothers. Sadly, my Uncle Bill, who was a wonderful and really intelligent guy, but who struggled greatly, eventually, later in his adult life, took his own life. Then there are my dad's older brothers, Virgil and Wayne. They were both remarkable men in their own ways. My Uncle Virgil was in the 1st Marine Special Forces Unit during World War II. It was called Carlson's Raiders. We only learned this a few years ago, after he was gone. But he was in this 1st Marine Special Forces Unit, and he had literally almost unbelievable experiences recapturing islands that the Japanese had taken during the Pacific. He was in this group of guys who would float up quietly in inflated boats onto the shores of these islands and these atolls in the Pacific and go take out these Japanese soldiers so they could recapture these islands for the U.S. forces. My Uncle Wayne was the one who took us boys kayaking in the summers on these amazing rivers down in the Ozarks in Missouri. And I loved these uncles, but there was also, I think, a little bit of a sadness about them, or maybe what I might call an unresolved disagreement with life. For Virgil, maybe this came from just seeing too much evil and sadness in the war. I get that. Like, you can see enough horror in life that it's really hard to come back from. Although he went on to be a remarkable man. And, maybe for my Uncle Wayne, I think maybe it was wanting life to make sense or to be more fair to people. I don't know. But I always had this sense that they both were kind of wrestling against life. My Uncle Wayne gave much of his energy to helping boys who came from tough families and who had the odds stacked against them. When he moved to Oregon later in life, he took a big room in his house and he converted it into and he intentionally built a house in a poor neighborhood. And he converted this room into a computer lab so that boys who had no access to that stuff could come to his house and learn technology. Just did that, all on his own. And so I don't mean to imply about them that there was not a pursuit of what was good, because there was in these men, but they rejected faith because there were things, I think, that they couldn't reconcile. And I get that, because if we are honest, even as followers of Jesus, there are things in the world that are hard to reconcile. And so I understand that. But what I do want to say is that my dad became different from his brothers in many ways. Different from the family that he was raised in. And all those things I listed off about my dad, about the wonderful, authentic person my father became, all those things I listed off about my dad, as you looked closely at him, as I looked closely at him, I realized they were rooted in this place where my dad had some idea deep inside himself about what an authentic human being looks like. And that idea of an authentic human being, of a good and authentic human being, was rooted in his faith, in his vision of Christ and his understanding of what it was that Christ had invited Dick Lehman into. And out of that journey, he became an authentic self, an authentic person. and became continually across his life, his adult life, more and more the Dick Lehman who was always meant to be. This is one of my favorite pictures of my dad, taken at one of my siblings' weddings. Was that at Cass' wedding or Rich's? Yeah, my little brother's wedding, which I was blessed to perform virtually on the beach in Monterey, California. That look on my dad's face, that is the joy of a heart that is in sync with all the things that are truly good. My mom, as you may have heard me say, is 95 and struggling tremendously these days with dementia and physical struggles, as you do at 95. My dad, unfortunately, has been gone 20 years, and I still miss him terribly, terribly. And as I said, I began to realize who my dad actually was in my 30s, and I was blown away when I began to see this. How was it that this man I'd rebelled against as a teenager and not given much credit to in my 20s was suddenly so good and wise? Well, he wasn't really suddenly so good and wise. He had been becoming that for years, long before I was a twinkle in his eye. This story will give you some idea of, I think, who my father was and the impact of a good and authentic person on other human beings. So a while back, we were out of town. I don't know where we were. And I started thinking about childhood memories. And when my dad taught at Parsons College in Fairfield, Iowa, one of Parsons' values was, in the beginning anyway, was a better teacher-to-student ratio. And so they put a lot of emphasis on professors spending time with individual students or smaller groups of students. So it was common for us to have Parsons College students at our dinner table when I was in grade school, because my dad would spend time with them socially and then tutor them, help them with their studies. And one of those students made a huge impression on us because he kind of became a part of our family. His name was Tim Rutz. And Tim lives right over here in, I think, Munster, Indiana. And I hadn't thought about Tim Rutz in a million years. Tim's the guy who taught us to ice skate, took us sledding in the winter. I remember doing all these winter sportsy things with Tim Rutz. And he was just fun. And when you're like 8, and a kid that's like, 18, 19, 20, I don't know how old he was, wants to hang out with you, you're like, it's like we got the ultimate big brother. So especially me and my 2 older brothers and Tim, we would do all these things. And I was thinking about, man, what a great guy, and how he spent all that time with us. Like, I don't think my dad didn't order people around. I don't think he said, go play with my kids. I think Tim just played with, Dr. Lehman's kids. So, I turned to my best friend Facebook, and I found Tim Rutz. And I sent him a message. And I knew it was him because he had Parsons College listed as his alma mater. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I reached out to him. I said, listen, you probably don't remember memories of you teaching me how to ice skate and taking my brothers, Joe and Tom, and I sledding, and you having dinner at our family dinner table in the years that you were at Parsons College. And I don't know if you remember us. I don't even remember my dad, Dr. Lehman, Dick Lehman, blah, blah, blah. A couple days go by, I get this message back. He's like, oh my God. He said, I think about those years, and I think about your family all the time. And then he said this. He said, your father is the person who made the biggest single difference in my life as a young man. And I was like, right? And I told that to my brothers, and we're all just like, go Dick Lehman, When I left my Catholicism behind at 20 years old, and Lynn and I began attending what back then we called Bible-believing churches, I thought I'd figured out all these things about Christianity that my dad, as a Catholic, surely didn't get, right? Because now I'm reading the Bible more than my dad. I got these things figured out, right? That's good. Dad loves Jesus, but, I got the stuff figured out, right? And now I realize that my dad's understanding of Christ and what Christ invites us into was deeper and more beautiful than a lot of what I thought I was finding in my 20s. I found good things, but my dad knew, C.S. Lewis would have said, my dad knew the deeper magic. And My dad had these, I now realize, these deeper and more beautiful perspectives on Christ and the Christian journey that now at this stage of my life I'm coming into. And that's an interesting thing to me. But what I really have just wanted to share with you this morning is that when my father came to Christ, it was not just to the right religion. He heard in Christ this invitation to a genuine humanity, an invitation to the recovery of his real self. And because it was that kind of journey for him, he became that. He became a remarkable and very alive human being. And when I think back about my dad, one of the things I see is that there was this quiet joy about him. You see the connection? The joy in my father's life was the joy of the whole journey that Christ took him on, to become more a real human being, a real person, what he was made to be. And that's the journey I find myself on. You know, I've had different iterations of my Christian faith. Fran Lehman's Christian faith 1.0, 1.1, 2.1, 3.4. You know, had the iterations where I knew everything. I had the iterations where I had to prove my worth by being a successful pastor. I had the iterations where I could go on and on. Lots of different versions. There was some legalism iteration in there, you know, where I knew how we're all supposed to behave and I was going to tell everybody else how to behave. And now I'm trying to be on the journey of becoming a genuine human being. The person that God made me to be, the kind of person that God made me to be. And it's a beautiful thing. And it's the most joyous journey that I think any of us can possibly take. So, you know, maybe you had a crappy dad, or maybe you had a dad who was there, but he just didn't show you that kind of path, like even though I couldn't see it when I was younger, but like my father showed to us. If that's the case, this will sound like a silly thing to say, but you can borrow my dad today. Because he looks a lot like Jesus. And maybe he can inspire you, maybe this little bit of his story can inspire you to take the kind of journey with God that helps you to become your most free, good, and authentic self. And Pop, happy Father's Day. See you soon.